Hello, everybody. Khambrel Marshall here, KPRC2. I'm joined here by Phil Archer, who's retired.
Stabbed from the past.
But back today, and Robert Arnold, who, of course, is an investigative reporter here. And we're here because today is the 20th anniversary of the date that Enron declared bankruptcy. And that was a day that many of us remember. I was anchoring here during the noon 4 and 5 during that period of time. You were reporting as well. And I want to just start with you because you were there, both of you were out on the streets covering this sort of thing. What really stands out to you? I mean, 20 years ago, clearly, but a lot of this stuff is still very clear in a lot of our minds.
The visuals, I mean, it was a business story, but the visuals were so compelling. All those people that day who were carrying their boxes of stuff out on the street and waiting for a ride, all the employees, 20,000 employees, almost all of them let go. I mean, they were all let go, but a big chunk of them let go that very first day. And to see that at this corporation that had been, I think you'd have to argue, it was our city's marquee business at the time.
No question.
To see that happening
No
there?
question. Enron Field.
Yeah.
I mean, oh yes, no question. Ken Lay was one of President George W. Bush's close allies. Called him, was it Kenny Boy? They referred to him. The family did. Yeah.
Well, Ken Lay was sort of the unofficial mayor of Houston, Texas at the time. Everybody came to him for advice.
Enron Field, of course, now Minute Maid Park. Dominique and I we did our newscast from there live on the opening of that. And Enron, the key to the city was anybody who is Enron, they pretty much had an open door.
Right. There's also this that I've noticed has gotten lost over the last few years. Our current state energy management system is Ken Lay's management system. The deregulated system that we have now was envisioned and pushed through and set up by Ken Lay.
That came up during ERCOT. During all the things with ERCOT, that came up again, that this was all came from Ken Lay's vision of deregulation, and that did, you're right, it had been lost, but after, when we had the massive failure of ERCOT earlier this year, that came up again as to how we got here with this system.
Well, but there was uncharted territory for Enron early on when he came in from his company and they started bringing on Skilling and Fast Out and those other people. Talk about the uniqueness of the system that they set up that was so unique that they were the apple of the eye.
Well, yeah, but a lot of that was based on on imaginary numbers too.
Well, ultimately it was,
and some pretty slick book cooking.
Well, just before the fall of Enron, their stock was trading at about $90 a share.
It was the high, right?
Right, 90, and then on the day of the bankruptcy, it was 26 cents a share.
Yeah.
That pretty much lays out what was going on, because all of these people were also high earners. These weren't $30,000 a year people at Enron. These people.
No, there was talk. I mean, even like secretaries were making like $85,000 a year.
Yeah, one of my takeaways from covering that story was, until then, I really had no idea, and I think most of us had no idea how much money there was at the upper levels of that corporation.
Right.
And
well, but then
I don't think it's the only corporation to set up like that,
But one of the things I'll remember was so many people, their retirement was so heavily invested in Enron stock that it just obliterated them. It wiped them out. I remember talking to senior citizens who had been retired for almost 10 years, who had to go back to work as Walmart greeters because everything was wiped out. I remember when it really hit me, just how big. I remember how big it hit me was I was standing outside the federal courthouse in downtown, and this is before the indictment. This is soon after. This is when the first wave of lawsuits started coming in, and there are people from Milwaukee and all these other states that, the teachers' pension fund was heavily invested in Enron. Now and I'm like, oh my God. I mean, this was literally nationwide that this was having ripple effects.
So you're talking about people who had been at Enron, who had retired for a number of years, and then this happened, and so the money that they were depending on a regular basis was gone.
Wiped out.
$2 billion.
Yeah, wiped out. Just wiped out.
Do you remember the process? It seemed, when I look back and I think about how we were reporting on it, that it all seemed to, once it started to trickle, it unraveled pretty quickly.
Lightning speed. I mean, it was like almost from, I think when Skilling resigned as CEO, in August of 2001, I believe.
That sounds right.
Yeah, so August of 2001, then and it was under very, like, there was no reason for it. It just suddenly was personal reasons. Everybody's like, okay. Then Ken Lay came back in as CEO. Well, by October, Lay is going, okay, we had this, we're readjusting things. Sorry, we had this, $1.3 billion whoopsie that we're changing. And then everybody's like, wait, what? And that was it. And then by December 2nd, that was it.
One thing that came out of it was a regulation that's now in place now across the country for these companies. As a result of that, we came from that to now that there's a higher level of government scrutiny, especially on the bookkeeping part, because the way they were keeping the books, it was like, as you talk about, imaginary numbers.
Well, was that
mark-to-market accounting, which is where you get to take profit for a transaction that hadn't gone through, essentially, a deal that hadn't culminated.
It's a legitimate form of accounting, market-to-market.
But not for what they were using.
But the way they would, like somebody said it best, it's like they would build a power plant, and this is for example, they would build a power plant and go, okay, we made $10 million from that power plant before the thing really had even turned on, and that was the problem. And so when those profits did materialize, well, then they would offload that power plant to one of their special purpose vehicles. And
let me roll back to the fall a little bit, because when Enron, and it came as a big surprise, as you pointed out, most of us thought Enron was this now a go-go, the most innovative corporation in America. And then it's like one day the light went out. All of a sudden we find out, it wasn't that. And in Houston, that effect, or the way people felt, it was very personal. A lot of people had retirement savings invested in Enron. Our former executive producer, Rick McFarland, remembers being in a post office around that time and seeing two guys almost get into a fist fight in line arguing about Enron. So that's how personal it was. People were contesting it in the line at the post office.
I mean, Ken Lay's ties to the community. I mean, the charity work. I mean, all of that. Everybody. I mean, he was looked at as this grandfatherly, type that would never do. Even Sharon Watkins, one of the whistleblowers, that testified before Congress and everything like that. Even she said when she initially spoke to him, she believed he didn't know, anything was wrong, and that he would, immediately come in and take care of it. And it turned out that wasn't the case.
For those who may not know, a background on Sharon Watkins.
Sharon Watkins was a corporate vice president at the time who had, when she came in, she started noticing that there was all these accounting irregularities and that basically everything was founded on nothing. It was all speculative. And so she has this meeting with Ken Lay that she said lasted about 30 minutes. And this was, I think, fall of 2001. And so she brings in all her spreadsheets, everything. She goes, look, here's what's going on. And one of the things she told me is that he took her seriously, during the meeting. But at the end of the meeting, he went, but you think Andy Fastow's doing a good job, don't you? And if you don't remember, Andy Fastow at the time was the chief financial officer. And she was like dumbfounded. She's like, I've just sat here for about a half hour laying out how all these books are being cooked. You can't possibly think that your chief accounting are doing a good job. And that was kind of it, So, and it just didn't happen. Nothing happened. I mean, the ship was not righted at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
There were several whistleblowers. Sharon Watkins was a whistleblower within the company. She never took it to the SEC. She never took it outside of the company. She never lost any money in her retirement account.
Right.
The way the rest of us, everybody found out about this, began with an oil and gas analyst, a guy named Jim Chanos, who refused to recommend, the best of my memory, refused to recommend Enron as buy, which was unheard of. Everybody was saying buy Enron. And he explained that I can't make head or tails out of their books. Their financials don't work. They don't make sense. And Enron put a lot of pressure on him. Enron, I think you'd have to say, came after him for that. But he, in the long run, was proved right. And what happened was, there was an article that came out in Fortune. Bethany McLean wrote an article for Fortune. He was a primary source for her. And she took much of the information he had and a lot of others. She did an excellent job. It's a really good article. And wrote an article about why is Enron priced so high? We can't figure out why. And then shortly after that, Wall Street Journal did an investigative series
That
finding
to
out
me,
some real
that to me
irregularities.
was when the Wall Street Journal really started doing its series is when the SEC really took note. Because one of the things that have now
The SEC explained on the stand that they didn't do anything about it until they read it in the Wall Street Journal.
Right. And one of the things that has come out since then, like Watkins, like you said, she was a whistleblower within the company. What was created now, and this came after the 2008 financial collapse that we had, was now you have this Office of the Whistleblower within the SEC. So there's protection. Because back in 2001, there really wasn't any protection. So, for you to be like a public whistleblower, you put yourself at great risk at the time. Now, that's been one of the Dodd-Frank Act, I believe, created the Office of the Whistleblower in the SEC, and that's been a huge check and balance against corporate malfeasance and greed, because at least there is some protection for the person that comes forward. The lady with, I forget her name, I think Haig is her last name, with Facebook, she utilized the Office of the Whistleblower of the SEC.
And they realized from that point, from the Enron circumstance, how many people's lives could be destroyed if they don't take that sort of information on the face value of it as being legitimate to be able to investigate it.
And there were governments, actual municipalities that had invested in Enron stock that were suffering trouble. There were teachers' pensions. That's what I'm saying. When I saw lawyers from all these other states coming down to file suit, is when you really started to understand just how deeply Enron was embedded throughout the country.
And as a corporate citizen in this community, Enron, we know about Ken Lay and Skilling and Fastow, but they had a whole big C-suite of really high-paid executives, including attorneys, a lot of attorneys across the board who are all getting paid. You're laughing.
No, you're right.
True,
I'm agreeing with you.
There's a
not
lot
laughing
of,
at you.
No, not laughing at me, with me, or about this.
With you.
Those people were across the board getting paid significant amounts of money, and I don't even know, clearly at this point, now in hindsight, many of them didn't know that what the money, the cash they were receiving, there were not that many people within that C group who knew the details of what was going on. From what I remember from the coverage we had, it wasn't until more details started coming out that they started to see this house of cards start to fall, and they were all, what?
Yeah. Well, if you remember that time period, of course, Enron wasn't the only major corporation that essentially was found guilty of wrongdoing.
WorldCom and all that came
United
Health.
I can't remember the name. I may have the wrong name. There are a number of them. So, I guess
that kicked off that was like the first domino. Enron was like the first domino in this big corporate malfeasance.
Well, and the most, probably the most important, the one that got most of the ink, the one that got most of the attention.
Well, because
did it change corporate governance? Do you think? Are we better off now, as far as?
I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that, because I'm not an investor in all that. You can read the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. You can read all these things and go, yes, on paper this all looks. But to say we're better off, we still hear about corporate scandals. We still hear about malfeasance happening.
But the analysts that I've listened to and some of the folks who are embedded within the industry indicate that because of Enron and because of the controls that were put in, having government have a little bit more involvement in what's going on, regulations. So I know that some parts of our community say, regulation, the less regulation we have, the better. Not necessarily so in this kind of scenario, and I think a lot of people whose lives were upended by Enron would go ahead and agree.
There's no question there's a lot more checks and balances in this. No question there's a lot more checks and balances in the system.
Right,
but yet then we still had what happened in 2008. So more laws had to be passed after that, the housing crisis and the mortgage, the subprime mortgage crisis, all of that. So, it's,
And you're still going to have people who come out and say, no, we don't need the regulation, only because that's the political environment we're in now, where it's easy to find people who say, no, we don't need that.
Right.
By the way, tonight at 6 o'clock, you're going to be doing what? You have
I had a long talk with Sharon Watkins, how her life has been over the last 20 years, her, talked again about that meeting she had with Ken Lay, that 30-minute, 45-minute meeting she had with him.
I don't want to give anything away necessarily from the 6 o'clock, although we know you're going to watch 6 o'clock anyway. Was she able to continue with a life that she's happy about, that she was able to?
With a life that she's happy about, yes. Was it the life she was going for? No. It forever altered the trajectory of her career, because when Congress released her name to the public, that was it. Some was like, okay, good job. She was one of Time Magazine's Persons of the Year in 2002, but she also lost a ton of friendships. She was also viewed by some as the woman who collapsed Enron, that kind of thing.
And Enron still was essentially her career. She still her job, what she does now is goes around giving talks about corporate governance.
And she's a professor.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's right.
Yes,
That's
she's
right.
also a professor as well. Business ethics and corporate leadership.
Well, business ethics kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, and naturally Enron comes up quite a bit in her lectures.
So you had about a 900-year career here at KPRC.
Methuselah. Wow.
So
Is that a compliment?
I've got shoes. Methuselah's age.
where does this story stand out? Well, you've covered a lot, obviously.
Right.
This one stands out for you?
That's no doubt one of the top. Yeah, absolutely one of the top stories of my career. I spent 5 years covering Enron.
Really?
Oh yeah.
And from before the bankruptcy until the convictions and after the convictions. And there were a lot of other players that went to trial on this too. The broadband cases were a whole separate case, and there were others.
Yeah,
So-
that was a product that didn't actually exist. I mean,
No.
they built an entire company
Well,
on something they really didn't have. If I'm
it's
remembering
That's
that
true.
correctly.
No,
Yeah,
that's true.
yeah.
That's
I hope
true.
I'm not misstating this, but it's essentially a product that didn't exist then. It does now.
Oh, of course. Well,
They were
But it
starting-
didn't then. They
there
were
was a
looking forward.
visionary
and-
because they were looking, because I think they were partnering with Blockbuster at the
Right.
time on that whole video on demand, which at the time was like a wow. I mean, only.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that was something that was kind of out there. Now it's everywhere. You get on your tablets, your phones.
Right.
I mean, everything. now.
Yeah, they saw it coming. They
Right.
just weren't there yet.
There's no
hadn't-
question these people were visionaries. It's
Oh, no.
just, you know, it was hubris.
Even today, the people who got hurt at Enron, who worked for Enron, will say it was the most stimulating place I ever worked.
They attracted the brightest, and they attracted
were,
some of the
yeah.
best in the industry across the board. And unfortunately, as you said, the hubris is what got the best of them. But
You started this conversation with, what do you remember the most? And you said it's the visuals, and I have to agree with Phil on that. Watching people walk down those steps, you know, past what is now become known as the Crooked E,
right.
Right.
just carrying, like plants. I mean, they were like, had plant, I mean, everything. Just
Well-
clean your stuff out and bye-bye, and guess what? Your pension plan that you thought was doing really well, it's no longer
Right.
there
It's-
anymore.
It's
yeah.
a feeling, and it's rare, but to see thousands of people having the worst day, one of the worst days of their life,
Yeah.
is
It was touchy
it,
as well in how you cover
it gets
it.
your attention.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
had nowhere to go, and they didn't know where to go from there. Because not only had they lost their job, they had lost essentially their future. I think Wanda Sykes, the comedian, had said, you know, brilliantly, she was talking about Enron. She was doing a stand-up bit about Enron, and she had said, you know, I've been mugged before, and that stings. But I've never been mugged of my future, and that's what these people at Enron did. And I was like, that is a very brilliant way to put that.
Well, today is that day, December 2nd, 20 years ago, Enron declared bankruptcy.
Does it, you know, 15 years ago, we were still eating and sleeping and breathing this. Now, it's hard to even hear a mention. We're getting a mention today because it's 20th anniversary, but it seems, you think, that Houston's largely forgotten about Enron?
Well, you've got a generation now that didn't grow up under the shadow of that. You know, that doesn't know that Minute Maid Park was once Enron Field. Yeah, I mean the Ken Lays and all. That's a different era for a lot of people now.
Well, this gives us a chance to look back on it, and gives us a chance to get you to get off,
Make him come in and work again a little
get
bit.
off the get off. I say get off the massage table and come on in.
I think, I think. What do you think I'm doing?
No, I was going to
exactly?
say, where did the massage table come from?
Oh my
I was going to say riding horses or
Yeah, or
doing rodeo stuff, but you went right for
woodworking.
massage.
When you're,
Woodworking.
when you're on the ranch like he is, you know, that you work out those muscles.
Yeah.
You got to get that massage. Yeah.
Draw the hot tub.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't want to leave people with that image. So
No,
I'll
no.
let you wrap
But-
it up.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to wrap it up with something, and I'm sorry, the massage table just blew it all out for me. I think it's important that we do acknowledge this and go back and revisit it occasionally, because it's still out there. Human frailty and malfeasance and all of that still with us, and you have to continued vigilance. I mean, you were talking about the SEC. The SEC is only as good as the folks running it.
Yeah.
And what I remember from Enron is, those guys may have been just showing up at the office.
During that era? Yeah.
Well, I mean, they didn't look at Enron until the Wall Street Journal did.
Right.
And that was their job, was to keep posted on what's going on with all those major corporations. So, and as you pointed out, we go through these cycles now, not annual, but every few years, where we want more regulation, we want less regulation. SEC's budget will shift depending on administrations markedly. So nothing's perfect, and we don't have any surefire guarantees. You just have to be constantly vigilant and keep an eye on people, because we're all human.
And most frauds do start small.
Yeah.
The trick is catching them when they're still small before they blossom into these nationwide scandals.
I want to find out more about some of the people who were there on the curb and bringing those boxes down that day.
Joel Eisenbaum, our colleague Joel Eisenbaum, is meeting with those individuals today, and he'll join me at 6 p.m.
See how I did that?
I did. It's like you've done that. You should be an anchor.
I don't know. That's what I kind of do. But that's one of the things that's because I think a lot of people do want to know, how did they end up? Yeah. What were they able to get their lives back together? And a lot of times people, when we cover these kind of stories, it hits home in a lot of ways, because we don't just, and a lot of times you have to compartmentalize, but many times you do go and you think about these people whose lives have been disrupted. We think about families who have been torn apart by various things, and this was no different. And so you want to make sure, okay, are they okay? Yeah. That's a good thing. We want to make sure that they're okay, or at least we hope that they're going to be okay. So looking forward to your reports tonight at 6 o'clock.
And
Phil,
Joel will be with me at 6 as well.
Joel will be there. And
I'll be watching.
It's always great.
Phil, he'll be on the massage table watching.
I'm getting a back rub.
So for those who may not know, obviously we've been together for a long time. It's always good to see my idol. We can come back in and lend some credibility to these stories we've done. It's always great. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
I'm impressed that you kept all your notes from that trial.
I can't. Well, no, that's not. These are notes that I jotted down. I sat down and did about 30 minutes an hour of research, because that has to be the most complicated story I ever dealt with. You can't remember all the ins and outs of that. And we're just hitting high spots right now, and not all of them. So,
there was like
so I had to have some notes.
There was like power barges in Nigeria that got swept up in the. I mean, there was all these other things.
Indian power plants.
I mean, there was a lot of very strange things that were unearthed because of what happened with Enron collapsing.
History is a good thing. We can remember it. You can't deny it. It's history. It's fact. And the same is true for a lot of things in our world these days. But this is one that a lot of us can remember. So join us at 6 o'clock tonight here on KPRC 2, and we'll have more information, widespread stories, and in-depth interviews with some of the people we've been talking about. Thank you. Good to see you, Phil.
My pleasure.
Always good to see you,
both
buddy.
of you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
It's great seeing you, Phil.
See you.